Welcome to Back on the Broomstick,
a modern witch's spoken word grimoire,
where two witchy friends from way back are reconnecting to their pagan roots after a long period of mundanity.
We're rewalking the path of the wise and trying out all the latest spells, rituals, and magical theory in today's witchcraft and pagan practices.
So grab your wand and your incense,
your cauldron and your crystals,
and join us
as we get
Back on the Broomstick.
Hi, and welcome to Back on the Broomstick. I'm Layla, and on this episode, we'll be talking Austrian folklore, magic, and the surprising history of witch trials in the Alpine region. To help us with that conversation, we have as a guest, Christian Brunner, a druid, author, and folklorist with deep roots in the magical traditions of the Austrian Alps. With decades of study in shamanic practices, Christian brings an insightful and fascinating perspective to his book, Alpine Witchery, Austrian Folk Magic, Lore, and Spellcraft.
And I'm Chelle, and I am taken aback by this subject. So welcome, Christian. We're so glad you're here. Tell us a little bit about yourself and the druid and alpine folk magic aspects of your life.
Hello, thank you very much for having me. It's really an honor and a pleasure. First podcast appearance of my little self ever. So,
oh, wow.
Oh, well, the honor is ours then. Thank you. And definitely the pleasure is all ours too.
Thank you. So yeah, a little bit about myself. I grew up in the 1900s in Austria, in a little spot south of Vienna.
The 1900s.
I was just thinking that. I'm like, that really ages us, Christian. That really ages us.
All right.
Yeah. My son once thought that everything is born in 2002. He thought everything before 2000 was in black and white when he was little.
Yeah. Gotta love kids.
Funny kid.
So grew up there, the first 32 years, worked in Vienna for a while, and, had an opportunity to come to the United States. And that was in 97, so still in the 1900s, and moved into this house on Halloween. I didn't know. I've heard of it, but I didn't know what's going on really. And all of the stuff, I come to this country, first evening here, tons of kids.
Begging for candy.
Yeah. And so, but there's an interesting, jump into the deep end of the United States.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Right into American culture. Bam.
Yeah, exactly. And I was a banker, and soon found out while I was waiting for, green card and all that there are enough bankers in Boston. So went a very different path with substance abuse and homelessness services, where I'm still working in that field, family homelessness now. And my very much math and statistics oriented brain always has needed a counterbalance, basically. And so I started, I think when I was 16 or so, a school friend of mine gave me a book. He said, read that. And never heard of it, started reading it, and it was one of Carlos Castaneda's books. And,
okay. Mm-hmm.
With all the things that came to light after his death and so forth, there are some very interesting and I think very important, especially at least for me, very important things. And so I came into this path of shamanic work in the beginning, and then had the opportunity to work a week or so with shamans from Tuva and learn, and that's where I kind of figured out, it's very interesting. And what about my own culture, right? And so I dabbled or read a lot about Native American spirituality at the same time and so forth. And actually was in a situation in New Mexico in one of those ancient dwellings, right, on top of a mesa, and looked around and was totally amazed at the smell of the sagebrush there and so forth. And there were a couple of the three Native Americans there from there. And they told me all about the history of the place and how they connected to it and so forth. And I said, it's really difficult for me to connect with that because I don't know anything about my spiritual history in the Alps. I know about castles and kings and emperors and all that we learn in history, right? But not so much what the background is that I had to then, and that's where I started then.
So you found shamanism and you found that here in America.
Oh, yeah.
And then that kind of brought you back to searching for your roots in the mountains, right. And you found the Celtic people there in the mountains.
The Celtic people, exactly. And so at some point, I wrote a sentence, and in that sentence, the word druid needed to go in. And I stopped and say, I have no idea about the druids. I mean, I heard of them and all that, but I'm someone who's like, if you really want to know something, then you have to do it.
Mhm.
And so I basically signed up with the course by the Order of Bards, Ovids, and Druids in England. But that sort of brought a, the balance of the archaic shamanic work got a cerebral overlay kind of, and that was really a connection again back to or to the other side of my brain to the statistics and background knowledge and history and all that stuff. And that's what I then did in the book, basically.
Now, I have a question. How do you mix druid work, folk magic from your homeland, and living in the outskirts of Boston?
um, yeah.
I would, I after reading the book, I'm thinking, if I were practicing Alpine folk magic, and I have a similar perspective. I'm on the North Shore above Boston, and
Mhm.
how am I mingling that with this environment? And then when you add your druid element, I'm like, this has got to be like complex to practice all these things in such a different environment that almost
Mhm.
goes against all of that. When I
Mhm.
think of druids, I'm thinking of the forests and the trees and in the open fields. And then with the Alpine Witchery, I'm thinking tall snow-peaked mountains. And then I'm thinking, and then here we are in our concrete village.
Well, let me give you an example of how that can work. In my druidry, I'm in a grove, as we call it, a group of people who meets, at least 8 times a year to do the major festivals. And often enough, I write the ritual for that. We do a ritual, and it has some elements that are sort of standard, the directions and casting a circle and so forth. And then there's a core piece of the ritual that's fairly open. It should have something with the season, of course, but we bring our bardic inspiration into that part of the ritual.
Bring your own flair to it.
Yes, yes. And so I think it was last year I wrote the ritual for the winter solstice. And we went out there into Berlin, Massachusetts. I don't know if you know that. That's sort of further out to the west, lots of land and woods around and so forth. And we were a group of probably like 40, 50 people. And everybody knew their place. And when we went to the ritual place and built a circle and so forth, I stepped back, right? And nobody noticed really that I wasn't there, maybe people did and like don't know what. And dressed up as Krampus
Ooh.
in the back, right? I had my mask. You see a little bit of the red mask back there. So I had my mask and furs and my big, a cowbell on my back and so forth, and a switch. And then, in the ritual, I was called in. That was part of how I wrote it, right? And then I ran into that circle like they do in Austria, right? And yelled at them in Austrian dialect. No, nobody had an idea what I was saying, but it didn't really matter. And pointed at people and ran at them and whacked them a little bit, but not hard, of course, with the switch, because that's
Mhm.
part of it, right?
Part of
And
Krampus,
it
yeah.
it it became part of the ritual in the dark in the woods of Berlin, Mass.
Yeah.
That's how am able to sometimes bring into that.
There's always the woods of Western Mass to save you.
Yeah. Or the the other side, the Middlesex Fells Reservation. I don't know if you know that.
I
That's a
don't.
huge. So in Winchester, Medford, in the middle of that, a large piece of land, the state park or something. And I do a lot of dog walking there, and I collect pine resin from there for my. I make a lot. That's also part of my trade. I make a lot of things myself, like the candle that is burning in the background.
Hmm.
I made myself with the mugwort that's hanging in the background as well. So I ground that up, and a cabinet full of tinctures and salves in there. And so, and I collect things for that as much as I can in the forest.
We're big collectors of growing things, and I have my own little dried herbs back here going
Uh-huh.
on, and not lucky enough to have a collection of mugwort drying yet, but hopefully this year.
To kind of bring it back to the book, this really intrigued me because, as we talked about when we saw each other in person, and as our listeners know, I'm up in Salem. And if Salem is known for nothing else, it is the witch trials. As Layla and I have discussed before, and as you know, the accused here were actually not witches. And I was really surprised when we had our conversation at the Sacred Space Conference that the accused witches in Austria actually were witches,
At least some of them.
at least some of
Mhm.
them. Yeah.
Mhm.
And, in your book, you actually have documented verified information, which I find absolutely fascinating. And I was talking to Layla prior to us getting on. It's almost like if you had a textbook conversation. This has a lot of factual information, but it comes across as a conversation.
I'm gonna go you one better. It's not even a conversation, okay? I am a huge fan of folklore and mysteries and the supernatural. Your book did not read like a textbook at all. It felt more to me like the people are into true crime nowadays, right? The podcast about true crime, and
Yep.
you want to hear about all the court cases. You have factual information about these court cases, and some of them read like the most salacious, interesting, wild court cases that you might hear on a true crime
I think
podcast.
that's what I meant. I didn't mean textbook way in a bad way, but
Mhm.
everything is,
Documented.
yeah, it's like I have this one that I want to talk about in a minute. You have, the accused, their interrogation date, the court they were at. This is hardcore facts. This isn't theory and conjecture. I am surprised that this stuff was actually put in the court documents. Like that blew me away.
Let's back up just for a second. And
Mhm.
Christian, if you would please explain a little bit about the history of the witch trials that we're kind of geeking out about right now. So if you could just give us a
Okay.
What we're
little.
geeking out about.
Yeah. So, to make it as brief as possible, because I could talk about obviously an hour and a half. Yeah. So basically, at the time when the Witch Hammer was written,
Malleus Maleficarum, Hammer of the
exactly.
Witches, yes.
Yeah. So that's sort of when the witch trials started, not only in Austria and in the Alps
Right.
at all. And what happened though was that, well, the witch trials started a little bit earlier, but weren't recorded.
Mm.
People just didn't think that was important. That came in the Renaissance. People started to like, oh, maybe we should write down
Write this
what,
down.
yeah, what's happening here. And we can see from the witch trials how over time the ideas of that witch hammer of the Maleficorum get more and more imported into the thinking of the judges and the prosecutors and so forth.
So they had like a different viewpoint before the book, and then
Yeah,
as the book became more in popular culture, I guess you could say, then it kind of switched a
yeah,
little bit.
yeah. I think what happened was that the judges
Mm.
were kind of the elite, or the group of the elite. They were at least somewhat educated. They could read and
Higher
write, of course,
class.
and so forth. Yes, often were actually nobility themselves, and they kind of felt probably compelled to implement what's in there in order to not get in trouble themselves.
Makes sense. Yeah, that happened in a lot of places.
Yeah, yeah. And therefore, as absurd as some of those accusations were, they thought, well, they match the pattern, they match what's in that book, and I better use that as or accept that as legit evidence in order to not get prosecuted myself.
They thought they were doing the right thing, basically.
Yeah,
Yeah, and if they didn't listen to those things, then they might be accused. If I'm not
exactly.
listening, maybe that people will think that I'm also doing evil things.
Yeah,
It was a scary time.
right. And so in the early 1500s, the court cases were most often something actually happened. Somebody got poisoned, or some cow started giving bloody milk or something, which happens because of they get infected.
Infections, yeah.
Yeah, and witches were accused of that, but there was something tangible, right? And then with Heinrich Gammer's Malleus Maleficorum idea that the devil is all behind that, that's where it became a little bit weird in terms of accusation, right? The typical thing, the farmer's wife was seen flying out of the chimney on an oven pipe with the devil in front of her. So a cow giving bloody milk, that can be seen, that can be witnessed, actually. There's a connection to witchcraft. That's a little bit more tricky, of course, but everybody knew that the farmer's wife did not fly out, including the judge, right? Not really. So then we see also in the witch trials how that affects this influence of Heinrich Kammer's work, influences the death penalty and the rise of it. And you see a lot of increase of women, because we have quite a bit of men also been overall accused of witchcraft, but also the death penalties for women rise higher and more than those of men, of course. But then the 30 Years' War happened, and a lot of people come back, or like war veterans come back, have nothing, can't work. They're often disabled, or they don't know what to work because they never learned anything. And so they start using things like witchcraft to make a coin every now and then, right? And they do little folk witchcraft. Right? And then you see all of a sudden a rise of males being prosecuted because they kind of disturb the peace of the community. It's like Austrians are like hobbits, like disturbance of the peace, and everybody's like, oh.
So these men at this time coming back didn't have jobs, and so they resorted to like folk magic. So they became like the village witch, essentially. From what I understand in your book, they were mostly not accused of being a witch. They were mostly accused of doing witchcraft.
Exactly.
So they would be like the folk healer, the person you'd go to, and my neighbor made all my chickens die. So I want to make all their milk go bad. And so you would go to this village person and he would give you a spell or something and have you do something to get back at your neighbor, to do that witchcraft. And that's what people were starting to get in trouble for at that time.
Exactly. And anything that could be seen or observed they do that is out of the, Christian ordinary, I would say, would be a red flag. And then if the person also had a motivation to accuse that witch, that wasn't a witch really, then it was basically the next thing was the court date. In the book, there's one who was called in to reverse a curse on the cow.
Oh.
And she's named as a witch. So we know basically that she must have offered and was well known that she does those things. So the thing, though, that I observed and noticed is that the more romantic image of the witch, the person living in the forest alone with the rafters, the herbs hanging from the rafters and a raven on the shoulder.
I want to be that witch. I want to be that witch.
I know.
Me too.
Don't we all? But that image came later. That came sort of in the Romantic period in the mid 1800s. The witches that we experienced in the Renaissance and shortly thereafter, they, as far from one record I know, they lived in a ravine aside from everybody else in shags, and they had to go from farm to farm and beg for food and offer their services.
Interesting. It sounds almost bardic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in that sense. And as long as these services didn't harm anyone, I think they were kind of safe. But if you had a beef with them,
until somebody got vindictive, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think much like folk magic practices here in America, a lot of our grannies practiced granny magic. They were Christians, but they practiced earth magic or hill magic or mountain magic, but it was all folk magic, but they were Christians. They would have given you the evil eye and spat on your name if you had said they were a witch.
Yeah.
As they're making their tinctures and things of that nature.
Doing all that, but they were not witches. These were Christian people very often. Is that the same case here, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why it was accepted, because they would kind of had that veneer of acceptability by following the major religion, at least outwardly.
Yeah. And I think it's also as long as there were not too many around in the community.
Yeah, you get too many of us together and stuff starts happening.
Right?
Yeah.
What I found interesting, though, there's many things that make this different than the witch trials here in Salem. But the one thing I found very interesting is that people offered up the spells and rituals, and you detail these out in your book. That blew me away to be able to read some of that stuff.
Yeah, poor Giles Corey didn't do any magic or spells, so he had
Right.
nothing to say or offer. But these people, they did. They did say what they did sometimes.
Hmm.
I know that obviously things are different than they were in the 14th century, 15th century, but I just wanted to point one out that I found fascinating. This is called a spell to help a possessed person. And what the spell is, obtain the heart and liver of a pike, dry and ground it, and then smoke cleanse the person with that. Then rip a black hen apart and place it on the possessed person's head. Ground cinnamon, clover, mace, and nutmeg into powder and give that mixture to the afflicted person. First of all, ew,
At least it's spiced well.
right? I mean, I can't believe that this was all detailed out in court. Was that common where people kind of detailed out some of these spells and rituals when they were on trial?
Well, interesting enough, in the court cases, is often mentioned what they said under what they called sort of an well, there's the painful interrogation, and then there is the normal interrogation. Painful means by torture, right?
I volunteer for the normal interrogation, thank you.
Yeah. So they would start with that, and some of them I'm pretty sure were obtained during the painful.
Okay,
Oh,
okay.
yeah, but the difficulty there is that you have to take that into account.
This was under duress.
Yeah, they might have come up
Okay,
with
okay.
things. At the same time, you have these, what are they called? When people are compelled to say, there is a word for it in English. Admit, sorry. Admit to things like that. Often enough, they admit to kind of absurd things under duress.
Because they think it's going to somehow help them get out of that
Yeah,
situation.
yeah.
Okay.
And those you can discard as yeah, they're not real. But those, I mean, they're real.
They were really said, but whether it's an
Yeah,
actual spell or not is it's up
yeah,
for
yeah.
interpretation.
I was just like, wow, a lot of people are giving up a lot of spells and rituals in court. And I didn't know if I was shocked, impressed, or offended. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
No, that's part
Although,
of what I love reading about in this book because they are extremely interesting. And like
Yeah.
Christian, like you just said, Christian, these were a lot of said under duress, and a lot of these have crazy, wild ingredients that we'll get into in just a minute. So don't try these at home. We don't
yeah,
know if they're true. So just be very careful. Don't do it at home.
yeah,
Grain of salt, people. Grain of
Yeah,
salt.
there
Take
you
it
go.
with a grain of salt.
right. I think that there's also what I found very helpful is it's pretty much all sympathetic magic. And if it fits that mold, then there's a good chance that it was actually done that way.
Right.
When they're talking about demon magic, then it's
More
it's
crazy.
iffy there, yeah. And also, but it sounds a lot. There's 76 or so spells in there from, I don't know, 50 or so court cases. I went through many more of them. I went over 1,000 accused.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So you see that the ratio basically of, and that was like 350 to 400 trials. So the ratio is, not that great
Okay.
in that
Okay.
sense. Most of them didn't say anything, basically.
Okay. Okay.
In that same vein, one of the spells that you have in here is very much practical magic that would have seemed like magic to the people at the time in 1669 when this particular court case happened. And you're going to have to help me out with the name of the accused here. This is Casiliac? Kyliak Gruber?
Cecilia,
Cecilia?
basically. Yeah.
Cecilia. Okay, Cecilia Gruber, December 13th, 1669. One of the spells that she details in her trial was to take a horseshoe nail that you found on the street and to put it in the fire. Once it's red hot, you then drop it into bad milk. They didn't have refrigeration, obviously, in the 1600s. So you explain in the book, unless it was fresh from the cow, and even when it was fresh from the cow, it could have had bacteria in it. So if you had bad milk that tasted bad and you threw a glowing hot piece of metal into it, you essentially could be sterilizing some of the bacteria in there, cooking it and making it safer to eat. So this spell is very practical. So that sympathetic magic goes all the way straight to actual, real, an effective thing to do, an effective scientific thing. But it would have seemed like magic to these people.
That is not how I'm heating up milk nowadays.
No.
So.
No horseshoe I found in the street. No.
Yeah, I mean, they could have used any metal, right? They
Yeah.
do that, but the shoe nail itself, there's another spell where you use just those things that are bent over when you pound that in. I forgot what the
I
name
forget
is.
the not hobnail. I just read that one, and it's to curdle or to make it so you can't make butter, right?
Right.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it must have had something. Although I'm working on actually, I've submitted to Llewellyn another book about all those beasts and creatures that we have in our celebrations around for the whole dark half of the year. So from November to Walpurgisnacht on April 30th. And one of the discussion points in the book is, I write it with two other Austrians, that all three of us have a different view of the legs and feet of Krampus.
Is it a regional thing? Is it because you're different for different regions?
The other guy grew up like a 15-minute car drive.
Oh,
So not that far.
so not regional.
Yeah, but it's also. I mean, it's also where your grandparents came from and your parents. So if they came from different regions, that's enough. But I, for example, have my view of Krampus's legs are human and a horse hoof. Others see two horse hooves. Others see a human and a goat hoof.
The cloven hooves, yeah.
Yeah. So it seems when you take the devil and the horse hoof and the horse nail, there could be a connection, but it's never said anywhere.
A lot of folk magic has to do with horse nails, roads, crossroads, that type of thing. So I'm not surprised at all. And Byron Ballard actually said that your history isn't from where you're from, it's from where your grandmother is from. So that could explain that difference right there. Now, real quick, before we get off the topic of spells, I want to go back to us talking about some of these accused may have been under duress when they gave some of these spells. And one of my favorites is towards the beginning of the book. Someone mentioned a spell to make it rain. And this is the Beggar Simon in 1666. And his lovely spell included, you had to dry and then grind together Alpine valerian and stinging nettle, which I love valerian and stinging nettle. Again, two great ingredients. Also catkins and marjoram. And then here's the kicker. The droppings of a squeaker, which is a baby wild boar. Good name for it. So the poop of a pig, dry that, grind it together with these herbs, and then smoke it.
No!
Not like a brisket, but like toke it.
Yeah, put it in a pipe and
smoke it.
I'm not smoking pig shit.
No! See, I'm almost wondering if the Beggar Simon was like, okay, you arrested me. I'm going to tell you to go smoke some pig poo. Sometimes I wonder if maybe they were pulling our leg a little bit with some of these spell ingredients. At least maybe the Beggar Simon was.
Yeah. That could very well be. I mean, we have another one, and he's coming a couple of times, appears in the book, the Lauterfresser. His name basically meaning that he was sustaining himself with drink. And
liquid lunch.
Yeah, the liquid bread probably. And he probably would have done that in a sec, right? In the court case, like, yeah, I'm doing this and that. And in fact, he was known to over embellish a little bit what he was doing and saying and so forth.
To make it interesting for the people in the court,
So he ended up having his own set of folktales.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. The drunk wise person that wanders around the countryside. A lot of places have that guy.
I know that guy.
Now, also in this book, you do mention a few people that the outcomes in these cases, these court cases, were very different a lot of times than they were here in the States and in some other places around the world. In some cases, these people said, yeah, I did that spell and this is why. And then they were let go. Can you explain that a little bit?
One of my favorite cases in that sense, because we know so much about that guy, Kristoff Gosner. Yeah, so that was in staunchly Catholic Tyrol, and they found like 60 witchy items in his house.
Yes, he had lots of grimoires, and he was definitely, yes, I remember that guy.
So definitely someone, he was an innkeeper, so he would self-identify as an innkeeper, probably if you asked him, but he did a lot of witchcraft. And apparently his father also.
So it was a family tradition, and he's the guy you definitely paid your bill for.
Yeah. And so he basically was accused of witchcraft in a staunchly Catholic environment in Tyrol. and could prove, though, that with his witchcraft, he, A, always invoked the Christian deity, basically. Many of his spells start with, I invoke the Christian deity, Jesus.
Tricky. That was
Exactly, yeah.
probably a saving grace to staying alive.
Right, right. And then he asked Jesus to do things like, send the thief devils or demons, right? So he asked Jesus to do that, right? It's
That's great.
a classic a classic demon conjuring spell, but
But
Jesus.
for Jesus.
Yeah,
Okay. That's, I
exactly.
like it.
That's how you stay
That's
alive
great.
in the 1600s.
Exactly. So he did that. He did that for a good purpose, to basically compel a thief to bring the stolen good back. And he does also another, and I think it's in the chapter about weather magic. He tells the court another spell how he fended off weather. So weather was coming, and he would stand somewhere and probably like move his arms and move the weather away behind the mountains, and where no ox moves and no cock crows. And so he tells that all in front of the court, in front of priests and judges and witnesses and so forth. But it was for the good for the community, because it didn't rain and destroy the harvest.
So if it suited them, it was okay. And if it didn't suit them, they were convicted.
Right. In Catholic thinking.
He could prove he was doing good stuff.
Yeah.
Catholic.
I think the Catholic thinking is, but he would not have survived in Salem. I'm pretty sure.
No.
Probably not.
Jesus or not. No.
Yeah. The Puritan thinking he would not have done well with that.
It also sounds like the reason a lot of people were accused here in Salem was more for petty reasons. It was more for land and money and power and, things of that nature. Whereas a lot of these trials, they actually did some witchcraft. And so in a lot of cases, they did a little witchcraft. And so they were being tried for that. I mean, not all of them, obviously, but at least some of these, it seems that there was a little reason why. So that's definitely fascinating. And so reading through these, I love your sense of humor, Mr. 1900s over here. But going through this book, I'm reading it and I'm like, oh, wow, Beggar Simon here with this poo smoke. And paragraph later, you very quietly just say, feel free to place any of those ingredients that you're not comfortable with. So I love that.
Okay.
It's also dangerous. I mean, if you've ever worked with or seen wild boars, they are not
dangerous. No, they are scary. Pigs in general are scary. Wild ones
try to gore you with their horns.
Yeah.
There's a reason why people say they keep their guns in case 20 to 40 wild boars come up on their property. There's a good reason. Now, speaking of smokables, I'm going to switch gears real quick and talk about your Instagram, because I have seen on your Instagram, you had a cough remedy not too long ago, a few months ago, and on it was a nicely rolled little herbal joint. Now, I myself love herbal smokables of all kinds, and I was trying to guess what you had put in there. I'm guessing there was a little mullein in there.
That was all.
There's all mullein? Yes.
Mullein and a little bit of thyme.
Okay, there you go.
You love your mullein, Layla.
I do. Yes. I do. It's perfect. It's a fabulous herb. There's so many good uses for it. Okay, so it was mostly mullein and just a little thyme.
Yeah.
All right, very good. So now tell us a little bit about, did you get into the herbalism here in America, or was that something that you got into in Austria? Where does that come from?
Yeah, I did that already when I lived in Austria. It was a little bit easier because I grew up with all the plants there. And I mean, dandelion, yes, I know here too, right? But there are some things that we don't have over there.
Makes sense.
Probably vice versa. There's probably things that you can't find here. Yeah. And that kind of was part of a question that I had for you that kind of leads into, did you, when you were growing up in Austria, were there people around and about that practiced quote unquote witchcraft? Or is this something that kind of died away after the period you're talking in your book? I mean, are there, obviously, there's probably modern day pagans there, but I mean, were there like local healers and things like that growing up? I mean, are these traditions still kind of going strong, I guess is my question.
And is the Celtic tradition that you mentioned earlier still alive? Is that thread still in there?
I would say no.
Okay.
unfortunately, yeah. So I came into that in the late 80s or beginning of the 90s when there was a much more into indigenous people all around the world. And that's what people were mostly practicing. And remember as a kid, there was an old lady, we called her Kräuterhexe, which means basically herb witch. And I remember she gave my dad a salve for, he had some rheumatoid arthritis, and he put that on there, and like a day later, he had a lot of pimples right there. And he went back to them, like, what's going on? He said, yeah, it's all coming out.
Ah, yeah, the negative
Yeah,
energy, the negativity coming out. Okay. Did he get better? Did it help?
yeah, it totally helped. Yeah.
That's
It
great.
was uncomfortable and didn't look very great, I guess.
So there still basically are folk magicians.
Yeah,
Okay, okay.
that's we especially herbalists and but now you see a lot more of them.
Yeah, yeah.
And I know from through Instagram and from people reading my book and talking with them that there's a lot of folks like us now who practice witchcraft in various ways. Definitely some Wiccans in there as well. Some do have grandparents, great grandparents who may have written something down or they had a chance to talk to them before they died. But it's not the witchcraft of the 90s sort of that
Right, right.
came back. I mean that exists also, but it's not the same. It's still there's some disconnect, unfortunately.
That happens. That seems to happen in a lot of
Mm.
places, but it definitely helps to be able to look back at some history like this. And I also loved at the beginning of your book, you talk about looking out at the mountains. You're talking about being there and looking out at the place where the magic is. And as a druid, as a shaman, animism and spirits of place and spirits of the land are very, very important. Is there a way that you like to connect to spirits of place, where you're at now in the Boston area? You like to go hiking and things like that. You mentioned that. Is there any
Mhm.
particular thing you like to, or way you like to connect with your local area?
Yeah, so in that Middlesex Fells Reservation where Walk the Dog, is a place where then usually take a rest, leaning against a tree and build a relationship with that tree and so forth and the place. And there's also a wild juniper bush on there, so I get my juniper berries for all kinds of things. Incense, also making bacon. So I kill my own bacon and so forth.
Ooh.
Nice.
So, and then a very Tyrolean way to do that is use more than the usual juniper berries for that, and juniper to it's kind of
Isn't it like not astringent,
astringent. Yeah, it was used for that as well. Yeah, but the smoke, interesting enough, apparently, like in until the 1920s or so, they would go through hospital rooms, smoking them out with juniper
huh?
Oh, wow.
in rural hospitals, so not in Vienna or something like that.
Well, yeah, but
In
hey, again, that sympathetic magic, that idea that
Mhm.
this actually does cleanse the area, this really
Right.
does do something in the physical world. So juniper smoke would be a wonderful way in the magical world.
Maybe we should get back to that.
Hmm.
Yeah, I love
Or
that. That's
both. I'm very Jupiterian. There's always like this and
yeah.
let's do it all.
Why
Yeah.
not both? Exactly. I like that idea too. Now, I do want to mention that in your book, I was a little intimidated at first because I thought it was going to be, like Shell said in the beginning, a textbook. And within the first few
I
sentences, you
didn't mean
completely
that in a
challenged.
negative way, by the way. Like, I totally didn't mean that in a negative way.
I know what you mean. But oh my goodness, was this book so much fun to read because
Thank
you
you.
just kept me hooked going through the whole thing. Like Shell said, it's packed with
You
information.
kind of laugh, you kind of cry. You read these stories and you're like, oh, wow. But then 2 pages later, you have a funny anecdote that kind of makes you giggle to yourself.
Yeah.
And you also bring, I really like how at the end of each trial you talk about a lot of them like today, how it would translate today
Hmm.
and what they may have tried to use those ingredients for, what they may have meant by different things that they did. And that was a lot of fun to read as well. I really liked those connections.
Yeah, I was happy to read that I don't really have to rip a black hen in half.
That you can cook it before and then put
Hey,
it
with those
on.
seasonings, cooking it after, maybe they mean like cutting off the breasts and the legs and the thighs and then seasoning it with all those yummy seasonings. I could
Hmm.
get into that kitchen magic.
I had this vision of actually a turkey, and like you know how like after
The
the turkey's cooked,
spatchcock and the turkey.
you're like ripping all the stuff off, ripping legs off, and
Hmm.
that was my vision.
Well, there's another one with a where you need a chicken for, and it doesn't say to rip it apart, but it there's this detail, and usually when that level of detail is mentioned, I feel much more confident that that was actually a spell
Hmm.
than if the detail is missing, and that one is like obtain a hen, but don't haggle for it.
I've been told that. That was one of the pieces of folk magic, I guess, that was passed down to me. I was always
Hmm.
told that you should not haggle for a magical item. So I've heard
Yeah,
that one before.
and if you read that in a 15, 1600 court record, you know those things, right? That's tradition that's been brought to us from our ancestors, right? And then you know that's probably something that is real. So you can extrapolate, and probably most, or if not all of that spell was they actually did that.
And some of them do read that way. Some of them you read, you're like, oh, yeah, okay, that sounds, like taking the footprints and doing that
Hmm.
type of thing. And, those are things that folk magic the world round knows about. So some of those you can,
Hmm.
like you said, kind of clue you in to which ones may possibly have a hint of truth to them.
Yeah, there were those where I found them in other regions, really, like the one that found in an English book of spell and in a Hoodoo book of spells as well, and
Hmm.
very, very similar. So like that's definitely you can say, yeah, well, that is one that was widely used and practiced.
And that's one of the things that I find fascinating about folk stories, folk magic, is that, somehow I think we've all kind of tapped into some sort of universal truths in a lot of these things because these stories and these magical spells and ingredients show up in so many different places and they developed separately, but they're all so close
Mhm.
and similar. And I love finding those. I think that's absolutely fascinating. So, this is definitely a book to get. Alpine Witchery. If you are interested in
Yeah.
folk magic, if you are interested in history told in a fascinating and not textbooky way, sorry, Shell, then you should then this book is a very fun read. I highly recommend you check out Christian's book. Check him out at any workshops. Are you coming up on any workshops? You doing any more coming up?
Yeah, there is a Llewellyn author talk in June. I have signed up for June 19th because I have the day off.
Very
My
nice.
company does give us the day off.
For the Juneteenth. Wonderful.
Yes.
That's great.
And then the conference is over 10 days and there's a weekend also. So I don't know yet when.
I will find some information. I will squeeze that out of our Llewellyn people and stick some information up on the
But
show notes for people to find that so they can sign up because we absolutely loved your workshop.
thank you. Thank
It
you.
was a lot of fun and a lot of information. It was really, really good. So I highly recommend people check you out there.
Yeah, next time I heard your podcast about the conference
Yes.
and I heard you guys talk about giving things to people.
Oh yeah, the cards, the tarot cards
Yeah,
we
yeah,
handed out. Yeah.
and something to for people to take with,
Yes.
right? And I was like, I could have done that. Mm.
I
That's
love a
Shell's
good
trick. Yeah.
takeaway. I
Yeah, take
love
away that.
takeaways. And,
Yeah.
and and how it started with us doing that all the time with different things that we do is that I had gone to a few workshops at various places over the years. And when I was given a takeaway, I was thrilled beyond belief. Like I just
Mhm.
love a takeaway. So I just think that you give people a takeaway and there's something that sticks with them about you
Yeah,
and what you've said.
yeah.
I'm gonna put a recommendation out here for you, Christian. Please, if you do decide to do a takeaway, and maybe you do ingredients from the spells in the book, no pig poo. I just
No
recommend,
big deal.
please, no pig poo.
Why? Come on. That's what I was thinking. No, no, I'm not going to tell you because it's going to be a.
Gonna be
But
a
do come
surprise.
to my next.
All right.
If you
Well,
come to
now we're not
the.
gonna miss it because we got to know what the takeaway is gonna be. And as long as it's not pig
Your
poo, I'm
takeaway is
there.
coming in a paper bag.
No, no, I said no already. All
No,
right.
no,
Well, thank you, Christian, so much for joining us. We have had, as usual, a very enlightening and very fun time hanging out with you. We'll definitely have you back on because there's so much more to talk about for sure.
And we
But
are
thank
so
you.
glad that you took the time and were able to chat with us tonight.
Oh,
So
absolutely. Thanks for the invitation.
thank you so much.
Absolutely. I mean, it was so fun. I couldn't believe it. When you emailed me, I was like, hey, that sounds kind of interesting. Yeah, let's get together. And then you're like, by the way, I will also be at Sacred Space. It was one of the first synchronicities that we had at Sacred Space and one
Yeah,
of my favorites.
So many
very cool.
synchronicities. Yeah.
definitely.
And thank you for coming to our ritual there too. That was very nice to see
Oh,
you there.
absolutely.
That was great.
Yeah, the fool is still on my altar there.
Oh, nice.
You liked your takeaway. See?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, so when I heard that I was walking the dog, that's my podcast time, and I heard that, I immediately knew what I'm gonna do.
All right. Well, we'll be surprised, everyone. So all our listeners, go check out Christian Brunner's next workshop in person. Maybe you will too get a very cool takeaway that's not going to be pig poo.
I'll be there because I love takeaways.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for listening to Back on the Broomstick. And Christian, thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you. It was my pleasure and honor, as I said.
And we will put some links in the show notes where people can find you and where they can find your next workshops online and in person and all that. And of course, where they can get copies of their book.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to Christian Brunner for joining us on Back on the Broomstick. As always, it was a very fun and interesting conversation.
I totally love him. And
Me
I
too.
really dig different folk magics from around the world.
Yeah.
So aside from the fact that he's super great, he's got some great content that is totally worth taking a look at.
And I know we keep saying it over and over again. This book has so much information and it's so much fun and so interesting to read. And we're not just saying that. It really, really is interesting to read. Even if you're just interested in weird court cases, get this book. You don't even have to be a witch to like this book. There's so much in it.
And it's not a damn textbook, even though you keep throwing that
I
in my
know what
face.
you meant.
So, definitely, especially if you're a history buff, this is a good one. This is a good one. And, if you're into different witch trials, again, a good one. So whether it's folk magic, witch trials, history, this book covers all your bases.
You're into ancient spells. I mean, I think I just saw today somebody was like, hey, what's the oldest grimoire of real spells? This kind of is it. This has got some really old spells.
You need to smoke pig poop, please.
No, nope, not gonna happen. I smoke a lot of stuff. Not gonna do that one. All right. Thank you again so much for listening. Please like, subscribe, give us some stars, give us some reviews. It really helps the show out and it makes Chelle and I cackle like little witches. We will see you next week. Same witch time, same witch channel.
Keep it wicked, folks, and please do not smoke the pig poo.
Not even on 420. Keep it witchy and pig poo free.